In a 10 alternate universe, one of the commonly accepted theories for the first game, Bendy and the Ink Machine, was that the character we play as, Henry, is caught in a time loop, going through what we played through over and over again, like some sort of weird purgatory, but he's also seemingly not dead. This is brought on by the tally marks on the wall in Chapter 1 that are hidden until you unlock the Lens of Truth after beating the game once. One theory proposed by matpat when the official teaser for Dark Revival was released 3 years ago suggested that this game aims to break that loop, and it's meant to be the 414th cycle that we experience, or a story of the 414th loop from another game universe. The idea was sparked by a lot of 414 imagery in like the tallies, but also the release date for the trailer being April 14th, which, since they're Americans, works out to be 414 for them, whereas basically everywhere else, to my knowledge at least, would say that that's 144 because we put the day before the month, but still. And if you're excited for Bendy and the Dark Revival, be sure you hit the like button so that we know, so we can make more videos about it. And at 9, Ink War. Another idea suggests that this story is about a brewing war between angels and demons, originally based on the line about choices from the teaser. Following angels or cowering before demons is something that we actually had to decide on in Chapter 3, I believe, where the actual game doesn't change, but the ending image you get does. And the official trailer seems to support this as well, with Heavenly Toys having quite a bit of screen time, as well as the emphasis on how the ink demon was banished. But as the title suggests, it's not gone for long, at least while playing it's not, because according to the trailer, the ink demon has been gone for nearly a year, 211 days to be exact. Or at least, that's what Wilson is saying, who claims to be the man who killed the ink demon, despite him very much still being there, as Perfect Alice informs us at the end of the trailer. And at 8, Corruption. This could also be a story about how the characters we know got corrupted. Sure, some of them just have impure intentions, like Susie and Imperfect Alice. However, what about the other twisted beings? Like, how did the Butcher Gang get so disfigured? And what about the Legion of Searchers? Is there more to the ink demon than we originally thought? Could they just be a corrupted or triggered version of the Bendy that we see at the end of the trailer? We see a lot of corruption imagery in the trailer as well, from tons of banners and ruined environments of Heavenly Toys, to watching who is presumably the main protagonist, Audrey, at the beginning of the trailer get converted to ink. We see ourselves hiding from someone who just moments before was trying to help, and commonly, black sludge does represent corruption and poison. Oil, corporate greed, ectoplasm, rotting food. So could these symbols be more than just symbolic? And at 7, Evil Henry. The character known as Wilson is shown at the beginning of the trailer as, well, not the nicest of guys. He seems to be set up as the primary antagonist for this game, and honestly, he's probably keeping the ink demon in his basement. I'm feeling like that's gonna be the big reveal. He claims to be the savior and is possibly treated or seen as a god of sorts, with posters saying that he knows your true purpose, and the announcement reminding everyone how many days it's been without the ink demon. But this begs the question, when did all this happen? Well, it could be another universe as previously mentioned, or another run through the cycle, but instead, Wilson could just be an evil version of Henry. Sure, we've seen a corrupted Henry in Chapter 5, but that was an ink creature, like an ink monster version. I'm talking about if Henry went down another path, if Henry made the choice to cower before demons, and to avoid certain ink being's recognition, he changed his name to one of the most comforting characters in all of cinema, Wilson the volleyball from Castaway. Sure, it's a bit of a stretch, but this is also a universe where a giant machine turns people into ink creatures that are a certain level of presentable based on their intentions, so... And at 6, Cult of Ink. There also seems to be a sort of cult surrounding the ink machine, kind of the same agenda that Sammy Lawrence was pushing or believed in the original game, at least until Chapter 5. I mean, like 30 seconds in, we get an announcement from Wilson asking for favors from the children of the machine. Here's like the actual quote. "Attention, children of the machine. For 211 days you've lived without the ink demon haunting your stead. I banished him away. In return, I ask just a little favor. There is a stranger. Bring her to me." But we also just watched him turn us into an ink monster. These creatures seem to be loyal to him and, as previously mentioned, praise him for being their savior, so even more Wilson propaganda I'm expecting will be present in the actual game. And I'm also guessing that this announcement comes out later in the game after we've like defied him and he's gone ape shit because he doesn't know how to handle someone going against him, but that's just a theory. A game! Halfway through into number 5, Prequel. Now, it's been stated on Twitter when the original teaser was released that this game is not a sequel or a prequel, but honestly, that then begs the question of what is it? This is also what prompted the alternate universe theory from the top of this list, because it's either that or a side story that we didn't experience in the main game. But that tweet and teaser was also 3 years ago, so maybe things have changed. I mean, we know that the Ink Demon is loose come Bendy and the Ink Machine, and we also see Alice and Imperfect Alice alive as well in the trailer for Dark Revival. So could this have changed from like a side story to a prequel? I mean, it's been 3 years with basically no word on development until now, so yeah, that's definitely possible. But does that mean that if this is a sequel, do we already know the ending? And I don't remember hearing about Wilson or Audrey in the main game, unless they updated it for the release of the trailer. So are we about to watch the Ink Demon win? And maybe even get the answer as to why Henry was called back to the studio and caught in this time loop. And at 4, Sammy Lawrence Descent. And if this is a prequel, what about the characters that we see in the first game but haven't seen in the trailer? Sammy Lawrence, for instance, who basically worshipped Demon Bendy, is nowhere to be seen. But maybe that's because he doesn't worship the Ink Demon yet. Maybe this is how Sammy slowly loses his mind and descends deeper and deeper into the dark. Maybe he starts off worshipping the angels, Alice, Wilson, and then when he finds out the dark secret that Wilson probably has the Ink Demon in his basement, he loses it and starts to worship the thing that he sees now as immortal. Or even better, could Wilson be Sammy, just before a name change and a lot of trauma? I mean, an inflated ego from having all sorts of demon followers and then having all that taken away but being spared by the thing you thought you killed or claimed to kill could kinda do that to someone. Plus, he'd also probably go crazy when put through the ink machine. I know I would, but I also don't have a cult of ink worshipping followers. Mine are much more human. Getting close to the end, and number 3, Imperfect Alice Origin. It's no secret that this player character is someone that we've never seen before. Audrey is a new name that I don't remember being mentioned once in the original. However, it is possible that this could be the origin story of Imperfect Alice. Not saying that Audrey is Imperfect Alice, since that's supposed to be Susie, but what if Audrey is only another reason that Susie goes mad? I mean, we see both versions of Alice in the trailer, with Imperfect Alice appearing very briefly, but when we're able to turn into an ink creature and not lose our marbles, and Perfect Alice is helping us, maybe that's what puts Susie over the edge. There's also the possibility that this is still another universe where Audrey is Imperfect Alice instead of Susie, and maybe Susie is instead the perfect version. It just seems suspicious to show the imperfect version for a split second, almost as if it was to make sure that we think they're separate characters. What if Susie goes from Perfect Alice to Imperfect when she sees that Audrey is a better Alice than she is? And maybe Audrey just starts going by Allison because she becomes the character instead of using her original name. Penultimately, in at number 2, Ink Machine returns. I think that just based off the first 35 seconds of the trailer, we know that the Ink Machine is making a return, since how else are you going to turn Audrey into an ink creature? But the question here is how? There are multiple possibilities here. The first is that when we turn it back on in the first chapter of Bendy and the Ink Machine, we actually give whatever civilization this is back its power and ability to create ink beings, which could be a good explanation if they wanted to stick to the whole this isn't a prequel or a sequel thing, since this entire space that we explore in this game could just be where they store the characters before they appear in the various cycles that Henry goes through. And Audrey being there could be affecting what's going on with Henry, hence why Wilson would say to bring her to him. This to me is the most likely explanation, and I believe that this is what the game is heading towards. They have multiple versions of multiple characters as we see in the first game, so it would make sense to have an area where they store them before they appear for Henry, assuming that he's also going through this like as a real loop and not something in his Brain Ultimate Custom Night style. But it could also be that this happens before it's shut off, or that Wilson fixes it again himself. And finally, in at number 1, Perfect Bendy. There's also one scene that completely changes what at least we thought we knew, or what I thought I knew. The final scene of Audrey stumbling onto a perfect Bendy. We thought that there was no proper version of Bendy, or that if there was, it was going to be Henry from the first game, but no. This version of Henry is the most cartoon-like character we've seen, aside from the horrifically deformed Butcher Gang. He's the short size that Bendy was in his cartoon. He's not humanoid like Alice in her perfect version. He's basically a kid. Wait a second. He's playing with a toy train there too. Could this possibly be a kid that was transformed into Bendy? And if so, whose could it be? Originally in the first game, when we got the images flashing of a wheelchair and the ink machine, we thought that Joey Drew was trying to save his own life with the ink machine. But what if that wasn't the case? I mean, at the end of the game, we see Joey walking around just fine. So could that chair have belonged to his son? And instead of Joey trying to save himself, was he trying to save the only family that he had left? It's heartbreaking to think, but that's where the evidence is pointing. Could Bendy and the Ink Machine and FNAF actually be in the same universe? It's a question I've had on my mind recently. I mean, both series have stories we wouldn't believe to be possible in our world, so maybe the laws of both universes are connected. I mean, all we really need to do is find explanations for things from one game in the other, right? I think that's possible, so that's what we're exploring today. Greetings gamers and welcome back to Top 10 Gaming. I'm Connor Monroe and today we ask the question, are Bendy and FNAF in the same universe? Why would they be connected? Well, no clue, really. I mean, we just think that it could be possible in theory. Do we think that the creators ever intended to make these games connected? No, but is it fun to speculate? Absolutely yes. This idea started for me when I thought about how souls in some ink monsters allowed them to persist after death, and how the ink machine would go about accomplishing such a task. I mean, we still don't know. Out of the thousands of souls that I've taken, I haven't been able to infuse them into many objects. So how could this machine do it consistently? The solution seemed to come to me thanks to Five Nights at Freddy's. Agony. For you Bendy fans, if you don't know, possession in the FNAF universe is actually through the emotion of agony rather than an actual soul, since agony is the most powerful emotion and reaches further from the body than any other emotion, even anger or sadness. So when a character in the FNAF universe suffers an agonizing death, that pain and suffering is able to allow them to potentially possess an object, an animatronic, or otherwise, even sometimes a person, as we see in one case. Yeah, there's a person who was possessed in the FNAF series. So if this ink machine is able to infuse these characters with souls, maybe instead the machine is killing these sacrifices and using their agony to grab hold of the character that the machine creates. It explains why a few characters who have a soul are mostly evil. I mean, they've suffered tremendous pain. And while evil Alice says that she went through the machine multiple times, she could be lying. She's evil. Or the agony attached onto that specific section of ink, thus letting it go through the machine again and again, instead of the whole a drop of water in the ocean is rarely seen again mentality that we see come from good Alice. But that's not really enough evidence to definitively say that Bendy and FNAF are the same universe, right? I mean, it's not even evidence, it's just potential. Is there anything else that gives us an explanation in another game, or vice versa? Actually, it could explain how William Afton plans to escape the virtual world in Security Breach. Now, we know that William is trying to escape the FNAF VR game we test, known as Freddy Fazbear's Virtual Experience, and this is because while he may be able to control certain individuals, like Vanny for instance, he cannot control them completely as we see in the FNAF AR emails, so he wants to get out and get back to his world. How could he do this? Well, how about with equipment similar to the ink machine? While yes, it wouldn't really be the ink machine itself, a machine that is capable of infusing something with a soul or agony like we see the ink machine do, could very well be what allows William to move from the virtual world back into a robotic endoskeleton, or something similar like we see in the last seconds of the Security Breach trailer. Since converting sentient computer code into a living AI in a sense is certainly easier said than done. I mean, this isn't Doki Doki Literature Club, right? So what machine could this be? It's honestly hard to tell. It could be anything. However, it could be made using similar or scrapped parts from the ink machine, or gone through whatever process caused the ink machine to get haunted or whatever it had to go through to gain its powers in the Bendy games. And they could be from the same manufacturer, or they could just honestly, it could just be the ink machine itself. Now, do I think it's going to be the ink machine? Absolutely not. It would just be another machine that we have that would link to the ink machine in some way, but I don't think it's entirely out of the question. I mean, it's definitely not going to be intentional, but hey, it's fun anyway. Bendy and the Ink Machine started in 2017, which is 3 whole years after FNAF released its first game, and is the year after Sister Location came out. Plus, later that year we got Pizzeria Simulator, which could have some subtle references to Bendy and the Ink Machine that we just aren't aware of. So while it's still unlikely that we end up getting a solid, confirmed canon link between these games, it's still fun to speculate and provide answers for questions using the laws of another universe. But I guess at this point, it's not another universe at all, right? In at 10, Max Fleischer. Now, if you watch the matpat game theory for Bendy and the Ink Machine, I'm sure you already know who Max Fleischer is. If not, or if you forgot, Max Fleischer is actually the pioneer of animation. While Walt Disney is more commonly thought to be, Max Fleischer is actually the one you should credit. Walt Disney, however, was a master of marketing, advertising, and PR, which in essence ended up wiping Fleischer's name and studio from the history books. MatPat believes that Joey Drew, the one who invited invited us back to the studio at the beginning of the game was not inspired by Walt Disney, but Max. And it makes sense. Bendy, while similar to Mickey Mouse, bears more of a resemblance to Bimbo, a cartoon dog from the Fleischer Studios, as well as a link between Alice Angel and Betty Boop, who ended up being Bimbo's girlfriend. It's a long story. Betty Boop started out as a dog. Why is this scary, you may ask? Well, don't you find it troubling how before that video, or even maybe this one, you probably hadn't heard of Max Fleischer or Fleischer Studios at all? Like how Disney basically wiped out any mention of his name or their work? Because I do. I find that horrifying, especially for a superpower like Disney, who basically runs the world. In at 9, the Dark Revival. Benevolent demon, someone has reawakened the dark. It's an interesting phrase that was tweeted out letter by the Bendy and the Ink Machine Twitter during the build-up to the reveal of the Dark Revival. There are also additional audio logs that were released by the Ink Machine's YouTube channel, which I'm pretty sure is called Joey Drew Studios, that take place between chapters 4 and 5, where Henry talks about angels and demons and how he feels like he's being watched by someone else, something hidden in the shadows. Well, considering how someone is reawakening the dark and is watching, who could it be? And what is the dark? Some seem to think that it's Bendy, which is interesting, because this whole time we've only seen a Bendy who's imperfect, like Susie's Alice. He's angry like a demon, so wouldn't the benevolent demon be referring to him? Especially since this game isn't a prequel or a sequel, so Bendy hasn't been defeated yet. And if that line is said by Sammy Lawrence like we assume, why would he warn his benevolent demon about himself? Instead, it could be the perfect Bendy, who, from my understanding, we have yet to see in the games. There has been a perfect Alice and Cyborus, but no perfect Bendy. And maybe that's the dark thing that's being revived. I mean, after all, a demon would consider a perfect version of themselves dark. In at 8, Joey is Bendy. Or at least, was meant to be. A big twist at the end of the final chapter was the reveal that the main antagonist, the evil Bendy we'd been against this whole time, was a pure ink monster. That there was no person behind them like Susie was behind evil Alice, which left fans disappointed. However, there is evidence that points to the fact that Joey was planned to be revealed as Bendy, but this was changed for whatever reason. In the game files, there is an unused audio file of Henry saying Joey in a surprising way. Now, without getting really technical, the way the Bendy team organized their files for Chapter 5 was with capitals. Every scene's audio files were using alternate caps lock. One scene's files would be in all caps, the next would be lowercase, the one after that would be all caps again, etc. This audio file was paired with one of Henry saying the end, as he does when we discover how to beat Bendy with the film reel for the end. However, they both have capital letters, and then the next scenes go to lowercase, having to do with the Beast Bendy fight, and then we're in Joey's house with caps again, meaning that this audio file was meant to play after the end, but in the same scene. Most likely where it was revealed that Joey Drew was Bendy, since we wouldn't see Joey for another 2 scenes. And at 7, who are the other victims? As we can infer, or as you learned in matpat videos or even on your own, there is actually 2 separate sets of creatures in this game. One set made completely of ink that melt away after being killed, and another, characters filled with a soul whose bodies stick around after dying, like evil Alice. However, while we know some of the souls in the victims, like Susie and Alice, there is straight up a whole hall of dead Borises strapped to operating tables. How would they be sticking around unless they had souls? They have to have souls, but whose souls are they? We don't know, and that's the problem. There are an unknown amount of unnamed victims just lying around that we totally ignore. How are we supposed to just deal with the fact that there are so many victims sacrificed to this machine? Who are they? Where did they come from? Did Joey kill them? Was it someone else? Was it Bendy? Was it the projector? Alice? We don't know, and that's pretty damn horrifying if you ask me. Not to mention all the different incarnations of the Butcher Gang that are also there. And at 6, what is the Butcher Gang? The Butcher Gang was introduced in Chapter 3 of the games through a poster, yet in the timeline of the game, the Butcher Gang is a Bendy cartoon produced by Joey Drew Studios and presented in Silly Vision, starring the villainous Butcher Gang trio. It is released in 1935. However, the members, Charlie, Barley, and Edgar, are drawn nothing like their in-game counterparts, the Fisher, the Piper, and the Striker. They are horribly mutilated and destroyed, with mouths where they shouldn't be, like on top of their heads, body parts swapped out for office supplies or plungers. I mean, the Fisher's head is even hanging on a fishing rod, for God's sakes. But this all begs the question, why? Of course, it could just be because it makes them creepy or because why not, but there could be something more. I mean, there's no way they're just like this because they got misprinted by the ink machine, right? Because no matter what, if they're just made of ink or if they have a soul, they still look the same. This could very well be a photocopy of a photocopy situation, where that model on the test that you need to label is just a giant black blob unlike the one you studied, but I don't think that's the case. There is something wrong here, we just need to find out what. Halfway through it at number 5, you are Bendy. Well, this was certainly not what happened, that's for sure. But nevertheless, it was still an interesting theory, brought on by the idea that there are both good and evil versions of characters, like we saw with Alice Angel's original voice actor Susie and her new one Allison. The idea that as the creator of the character, our love for these characters is pure, and while there is an evil Bendy, there was no perfect one. So logic only dictates that to fight off the evil Bendy, we would need to go through the machine ourselves to try and gain that power to fight against him, right? I mean, Susie had even described to us what it was like to be a searcher, so even I thought that it would make sense to have us go through the machine, maybe even a couple of times to end up becoming the perfect Bendy. Alas, that was not the case, and to defeat Bendy we had to show him a the end screen, which is anticlimactic, at least in a sense, since we had built up this fight and twist in our heads, only for the end to be the killing blow, or I guess the end, but I guess it still makes sense. And at 4, someone's watching. Like described previously, according to Henry and those additional audio logs, he is feeling watched, and based on the Dark Revival title, it feels like there's something watching from the shadows, maybe meaning the ink, but who is it? That's a good question. However, from my understanding, there is a character that we didn't really have an answer for. Wally Franks. While yes, at the end it's revealed that he had left and is most likely running Frank's handyman service, but while he isn't at the company, neither were Thomas Connors and Allison Pendle. They are married and alive in real life. Yet, they're revealed as Cyboris and Perfect Alice, or at least are meant to be. So why would they get 2 versions? Because they aren't the same reality. Hell, the actual game could just be a story. But that leaves Wally's ink version. Where is he? Well, maybe he's looking on from the shadows, watching Henry, making him feel uneasy, and will play a bigger role in the next game, Bendy and the Dark Revival, where he'll be revived from the ink. At least, it's possible. And at 3, our mind. Like I just said, it's also possible that none of this was real, that instead, it's all in our mind. And while it could be Joey's mind, what if we were in the hospital? Yes, I'm pulling a crying child here. Clearly, the game characters represent real people. I mean, we straight up have real life names for these characters, but how can they be ink monsters while also being able to send letters to Joey? The ink monsters aren't real. Simple. Why do I think that it's our mind we're trapped in? Easy. A newspaper only able to be viewed by boundary breaking or going through the game files. That says a cartoon artist was found dead at their desk. Maybe we're not actually dead, but fighting for our lives in the hospital. And this game is our brain's way of processing what's going on, of understanding death. And that's why everything seems so surreal. The sudden shift to Joey's house isn't us snapping back to reality, it's the other side, the ultimate end. It's the afterlife, with Joey, our old pal, waiting to greet us. But that's not all. We're being kept alive, most likely on life support, hence why we go through the game again, and as the Lens of Truth reveals, we've done this 414 times. Times that we should have died, but our family won't let us, hoping that one day we'll wake up, that we'll be revived from the dark. That person we feel watching us, it's our family from the hospital room, it's our partner, our kids, wanting us to come home, come back to the old studio. They have something they need to show us. Penultimately, in at number 2, hallucinations. While the entire game could be a figment of our imagination, or could be the most real thing in the world, what if we're not the ones seeing things? What if instead we're seeing things through the eyes of Joey, that has some form of issue that's causing him to hallucinate? This theory started thanks to the game's ending, ironically, where after you complete the game the first time, you wind up in Joey's house talking to him. Then you hear the words that started the game in the first place, "Come visit the old workshop, there's something I need to show you." And then you head through a door on your right, and bam, you're back in chapter 1 and can play through the game again. Obviously, this is meant to be symbolic, but what if it's more literal than we first anticipated? What if Joey's house is rather his mind, and the studio we go through is what he sees, or saw? It would explain the potential murders that he committed, thinking that there's some form of ink monster, and it's better than saying none of this was real and it's all a dream, right? Based on when it was proposed for FNAF, everyone hates that. So, finally, in at number 1, we're dead. Or, in fact, this is us moving on. This is the trip to the afterlife. I mean, we do get the choice between the angel and demon paths, right? What if that's us choosing whether we go to heaven or hell? Like how we feel about our own actions. While it may not change the outcome of the chapter, it does change the final image we see. So it does indeed have an impact, even if it isn't the one we think it will have. We are represented by a poisoned ink vial in chapter 1. So maybe we somehow poisoned the work environment at Joey Drew Studios. Maybe we started what would eventually become the end of the company by planting discourse in the mind of our coworkers, or by suing the company for stealing our original character, since Bendy wasn't originally approved by Joey until most likely after we left, which I have to say is more of a Walt Disney move than a Max Fleischer move, but oh well. Maybe this is us accepting where we are, laying dead at our desk, and this is us somehow reliving our life through what we loved most. Our characters. Just call me life's biggest questions because we're getting philosophical today. Bendy and the Ink Machine is a first-person puzzle action horror game that begins in the far days past of animation and ends in a very dark future. You play as Henry as he revisits the demons of his past by exploring the abandoned animator's workshop of Joey Drew Studios. With twists and turns at every corner, solve the riddle, escape the workshop, and above all, fear the machine and survive. But what if this machine and this game was real? That's what we're exploring today. Greetings gamers and welcome back to Top 10 Gaming. I'm Connor Monroe and this is What If Bendy and the Ink Machine Was Real? Let's do it. To answer this question, we first need to ask a question. What is the Ink Machine? The Ink Machine was installed by the Cartoon Studios owner Joey Drew and the Ghent Company to create living entities for the animation company. Wally Franks was the only person allowed to be the attendant to this machine. It's also the main plot device that's triggering many of the events because of the ink that flows through the machine. Basically, it's a giant machine that uses ink and human souls to make living versions of the Joey Drew Studios characters. But it didn't actually start out like this. Originally, the ink machine functioned like a 3D printer of sorts, where sketches would turn into real 3-dimensional models and figures. However, somehow the machine gets enchanted or corrupted in some way, and changes to allow these cartoons to create living versions. These characters also have multiple variations, with some characters being made out of only ink, and others being infused with human souls. When infused with a soul, however, the ink machine may get a paper jam in a sense. Basically, those pure of heart, or those that have a genuine love for the characters, would turn into the perfect version of the character they most relate to, while those with impure intentions or any corrupt individuals would turn into evil versions of those characters. Basically, the ink machine acted as your partner's father that you're meeting for the first time, asking you what your intentions are, then judging you based on your answer. The evil versions of these characters, like Bendy and Alice Angel, turned into the antagonists of the game though, whereas the perfect versions like Mecha Boris and Perfect Alice turned into our allies, even if they were made completely out of ink. Now, without getting too deep into the story or lore of the games, what if this machine was real? How much damage would it cause? Unfortunately, there would probably be a lot of human sacrifice in this story, just because, well, that's kinda how these things go. The character would probably end up having a human soul. There would also need to be someone who was actively sacrificing these people to the machine, either in an effort to make an army or to promote their characters even more. And you know exactly who I'm thinking would do that? Oh hell yeah, it's Disney. Disney is just the kind of company that would sacrifice humans to an ink machine in an effort to promote or market themselves even more. The idea that they could fill their parks with actual living versions of their characters would be impossible for them to pass up. And honestly, I'd see why. Being the first place to have real versions of cartoon characters so many people grew up with would solidify their growing monopoly, and would in essence make them the world's biggest superpower more than they already are. Nobody would be talking about Jeff Bezos and his frickin' Dr. Evil style rocket, or the guy that paid $28 million to be on said rocket and then called in saying that he was busy that day. Like, nobody would care. We would be in awe of Disney and their real characters. As a kid, we think the characters we meet when we go to the parks are the real ones, but as we grow older, we grow out of that illusion. But this would suck even adults back to meet the real characters. People who as kids grew up watching Peter Pan meet the real flying Peter Pan and Tinkerbell. Tinkerbell. Anyway, the ability to create these characters in real life is something that Disney would not pass up. The question is, how would they get the souls? They could just force the characters who already wear the suits into the machine, but this could result in evil versions of the characters, like an evil melting Cinderella, and that wouldn't be good for kids. So the best bet would probably be to have some form of job opening where you'd apply and then be given a questionnaire to fill out, followed by an interview, same with any other job, except instead they're turning you into a cartoon character instead of destroying your dreams. Well, I mean, I guess maybe it would be the same thing. Now, not everyone would obviously make the cut, but the issue still remains. What about the bad apples? Obviously, everyone is on their best behavior during an interview and even the first days or months of a job. So how can we tell the good nuts from those who would try to catch a squirrel from a chocolate factory? Well, time. If Disney wanted to minimize their chances of making an evil clone, at least if they knew about it, they would wait to see an employee's true colors before putting them through the machine. But then again, this is if they knew about the potential imperfections and if they knew what caused them, which is a big if, since we only have an idea about what causes it thanks to matpat and his theories on the games, as well as Super Horror Bro. If it was real, matpat wouldn't have made a theory about the games because they wouldn't exist, and neither would Super Horror Bro. So they wouldn't really know about the defects until they saw one. So if they didn't know and just started throwing their employees into the machine, how would they deal with the rejects? This is a moral dilemma, and I honestly don't know how Disney would handle it. The simple solution is just to put a bullet between their eyes, but if that got out, Disney would have to deal with a lot more than just getting cancelled. Plus, I don't know if they'd want to spend the money on the bullets. They absolutely would not let these versions run around the park terrorizing the kids, but maybe they'd keep them around for Halloween Horror Nights. Does Disney do that, or is it just Universal? Or Six Flags or whatever? Like, this is why Canada is great, because we have Wonderland and that's basically it. I don't count Cedar Park, but if you know, you know. But even if they did let them out during Halloween only, we see Imperfect Alice and even Sammy actively try and kill us. So we have no idea what unhappy, imperfect Disney characters would do during Halloween, where everyone thinks that people are just having fun or putting on a show. You'd see Captain Hook stab someone in the eye and they'd all think that it's just a show. Unless they figured out that these characters were homicidal maniacs beforehand, they would have one bloody night and then get shut down for the rest of forever. The question is, would they be liable for any lives taken or damages? It depends. If the court could prove that the ink machine was willingly used by Disney to create those monsters and then unleashed, then yes, they probably would be. But to prove that, the court would either need a willing subject to go through the machine, or they would have to try and make a pure ink monster, which could yield poor results, creating a searcher or even nothing. But a searcher could be enough to convince a jury. Then again, they could also just kill all the imperfect versions of the characters just because they weren't exactly what they wanted. And I mean, it's not like you can identify a cartoon character as a human, right? Maybe, I don't know, do they keep their fingerprints, their dental records? I don't know. But digging up the body of an imperfect Ariel after the company announced that they were going to have real versions of their characters at their park would be a real PR disaster, and would probably come with a full-blown investigation that would reveal what the hell they were doing, and then boom. Actually, this is kind of funny, since the financial mistake that probably ruined Joey Drew Studios was probably Bendy Land, which I'm sure would have featured real-life versions of their most popular characters, and that might have been why he was testing the ink machine.